CMT is a disease of the peripheral nervous system, and it's a progressive disease.
We have a very flexible approach because we're trying to cure this.
Actually, drugs for that disease could be blockbuster drugs. The investors in Europe saw that, plus the data from Augustine Therapeutics, and said, we want in.
Susan went to that meeting at Bio to speed date. She had 46 meetings this last year.
I've got 6 generations of this disease in my family.
My family really didn't have a name for it until my generation.
But we still have many, many, many people who don't have a genetic diagnosis because their gene isn't understood to cause CMT.
Everyone, to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook, a very different episode today. We're going to actually talk about how patient-led research is providing or proving it can deliver not just medical breakthroughs, but real market-moving outcomes. The CMT Research Foundation invested $128,000 in a small RNA therapy project with DTX Pharma in 2019. Hopefully I get this right. 4 years later, that same program was part of a $1 billion acquisition by Novartis. Today, we're joined by Susan Ruediger, the founder and chief mission officer of CMT Research, and Laura MacNeill, CEO of CMTRF. Together, we're showing how grassroots capital, strategic bets, and patient-led leadership can reshape both healthcare and business outcomes. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for being
Thanks
here.
for having us, Avetis.
Thank you.
Of course. Let's jump right in. Let's talk about turning grassroots donations into a billion-dollar outcome. It's rarely discussed this way, right? Susan, you all invested this small $128,000 investment in DTX Pharma in 2019, like I mentioned. What gave you the confidence that this small bet could create outsized impact?
Well, we started not at the very beginning with DTX, but we started with a baseline of knowledge. There had been a company that had done some work in CMT, and remarkably, it cured the mice before all the mice died. And the reason why the mice died was because the drug was far too toxic for them. So it was mostly going to the liver and not to the peripheral nervous system. And let me back up for a quick second so we can let everyone here know. CMT is a disease of the peripheral nervous system, which is every nerve outside of the spinal cord and the brain. And so you imagine all the little nerves that go to your fingers and toes and to your lungs and to your ears and all the way up. The nerves that control both the movement and the sensory nerves. Those are all impacted by CMT. And it's a progressive disease. So we first feel the symptoms of the disease in our fingers and toes. And as it progresses inward toward the central nervous system. So we might start not being able to feel our toes or wiggle them. And as the disease progresses, we might have difficulty breathing or we might have difficulty hearing. So it can have quite an impact on people's lives. And so with CMT in drug development, the goal is how do we get a drug to the nerves in your fingers and toes while bypassing the liver? And we learned that we can get, in order to get enough to the fingers and toes, so to speak, we had to give massive doses. And those massive doses, most of it was ending up in the liver, and it was just too toxic to go into humans. And when I learned about that project, and I learned the reason why it stopped, I said, it's fantastic. We've been able to reverse the disease. We got function restoration out of these mice. How do we translate that into humans without being so toxic? So at the time this was 2019, and we had a small scientific advisory board and a team of 2. And we asked the scientific advisory board, how do we overcome this obstacle? And they all said, you have to figure out how to specifically deliver this to the peripheral nervous system. Bypass the liver, bypass the brain, and get straight into the nerves that are affected. And we thought maybe there would be special pathways or channels in between your blood and your nervous system that might let the medicines in. But we weren't sure. We just knew we had to go explore that. So that year, I went to this annual meeting through the Bio International Convention in Philadelphia, and it's speed dating for biotechs, pharma, and they've just recently added the patient advocates to this platform. So I went to this convention on the speed dating app, and I was looking for every company that focused on drug delivery. What has a delivery platform, a delivery to different cells in the body? And I asked all of them for meetings. About 10 said yes. I think we asked about 40. About 10 said yes. And DTX was one of the companies that said yes. And what they had was they had a special delivery vehicle. Think of it like, okay, do you have animals, Avetis?
I used to. I used to
Okay,
have two.
so you know that you probably had to give them a medicine at some point, whether it was the flea or tick medicine or whether it was an antibiotic, or you had to give them an oral medication. And you have a couple choices. You could pour the whole bottle in the bowl and hope that maybe he gets one and not the whole bottle. Well, that's not a very effective. None of us do that. We know that's not what we do. You could try and force feed the one, or we could do the trick that anyone who has animals know. You wrap it in cheese or peanut butter or turkey meat or bacon, right? And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to take this naked medicine that ended up all in the liver. That would be the equivalent of pouring the whole bottle into the bowl and hoping that they got one. Well, the mice ate all of them. It was too toxic and they died, essentially. So it ended up in the liver. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to find that cheese, that peanut butter, that turkey meat, that bacon, that the peripheral nervous system, the cells of the nervous system in your fingers and toes wanted to take up. They wanted to eat whatever it was that we wrapped it in. Now the nerves are made up of they need the fat in order to function. So if we wrapped it in a fat, like a cheese or a peanut butter, then they would take it up because it's sort of a Trojan horse. We want to sneak it in and give them a present. And DTX had a fat. They had a lipid, which is a fat, that they could wrap the medicine in, essentially. They cloaked it in this fat, and they gave it to the cells, and then they went into mice. And as it turned out, the medicine went to the cells of the peripheral nervous system, and very little of it went into the liver. And what we also found out through that experiment was that we only needed to give them a little bit. Just like with our dog, we only needed to give him one. We didn't need to give him the whole bottle. We needed to give one that was wrapped in the right thing. So we could make the doses really low. So therefore the toxicity was low. So that's kind of getting ahead of the story. We met DTX at Bio on the speed dating platform and said, have you ever looked at CMT? Because they were looking in different diseases. And they said, no, what's CMT? So we told them all about CMT. They said, this might be interesting. The cells of the peripheral nervous system need fat. We have fat. Let's try it. So we gave them the $128,000 to try the CMT experiment. They were a small biotech. They were focused on a disease that caused genetic blindness. They were focusing on how to deliver that directly to the retina. So they had never looked at the nervous system, let alone the peripheral nervous system. And so we paid for them to look at it. We paid for their resources to look at it. That was $127,000. 6 months later, they had awesome data that they were able to apply to the NIH. And they got a grant, a small business grant, for $350,000 to continue the CMT program. And we thought, great, we just doubled our money. That's fantastic. And then 6 months later, they had great data. They earned $100 million in private equity investments because the investors were now saying, we think you might have something. And then 2.5 years later, acquired by Novartis. The platform is really interesting. The platform basically can wrap any genetic medicine in this fat, and it can deliver it to different cells in the body that require the fat. And so think of all the neurodegenerative diseases. Perhaps their fat, their motif, their delivery vehicle could be relevant for Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's. They don't know. Novartis is taking the bet that it could be, with CMT as being their lead indication and their the best data. So how did we do it? Well, we knew what the problem was. And we had lots of ideas for what we thought the solution might be. We found a company that was interested and willing, and we made a small investment. We assumed the risk. They didn't have $127,000 to take on the risk. We assumed it, the early risk. We maintained an open communication, an open partnership. We provided the scientific expertise for CMT. They provided the scientific expertise for their fat, their motif, And it became just a really awesome partnership. So we knew the problem, we had the focus, we had a little bit of money, and we made that seed investment.
Susan, thank you for that. That's great. For people like Nubar Afeyan, who hopefully are listening, the flagship pioneering founder, from my understanding, being on your committee and board, that there's been several other wins similar. I don't know if Laura or Susan, you want to jump into that, but from what I have understood from speaking to Anna, is there's been several stories like that. Is there any others we can talk about really quickly?
Our goal, of course, Avetis, is to take every project and hope it turns out like this, but that's not how drug development works. So Augustine Therapeutics is another fantastic example that's happened this year. A company that we invested very early stages in and saw a lot of potential in the work that they were doing. And they just raised, they're a German-based organization, but they just raised something like 78 million euro to finish their Series A round to start a human clinical trial for their product. So CMTRF is often at the early stages of the science, or at the moment where a biotech or a pharmaceutical company really needs that push over. They need the resources and the confidence in the market to get the right data, the right tox study, the right eyes to be able to say there's real potential here, like DTX had. And that's where our organization really thrives. So we have a very flexible approach because we're trying to cure this. So you might see us funding early stage in the academic space. We're often in that sweet spot of keeping projects that have real promise out of the graveyard of drug development, where most ideas stay. And we're there to really push them over the edge and hope that the market recognizes the potential that we see and then takes them on. So we have 3 projects in total that have really had some really incredible success in the short 7 years that we've been in existence. This foundation is very young, which is an incredible track record for any nonprofit that's working in the venture philanthropy space, which is our entire model.
And just, I don't know if you all know this as an investor, and in being in tech, a $73 million A round is really rare. It might be the top 5 or 10 I've ever heard of, to be honest with you. Typically Series A, 20, 30 million. It used to be like 5 million, right? And now it's 73 million. And that probably justifies, you probably already know the numbers, maybe $250 million valuation. So it's probably another company headed towards unicorn status based on a little bit of investment from
Well, we think Novartis really propelled that.
Yeah.
So if Novartis is going to buy a CMT drug and platform for $1 billion, it demonstrated to the market that this rare disease that affects 150,000 Americans, 3 million people around the world, actually drugs for that disease could be blockbuster drugs. And Novartis's investment told the world, we think CMT is the next big indication. The investors in Europe saw that, plus the data from Augustine Therapeutics, and said, we want in.
Wow, it's huge. Very cool. Laura, when you look back on your journey from donations to $1 billion acquisitions, what does it prove about this model that you all have? I know, Susan, you've been in it from day one. I don't know who the right person is on this, but you all use a very different model, the venture capital mindset when it comes to funding. Tell me a little bit about that and why you chose that route versus the typical donations to you guys are tackling the disease directly to kill it, basically, which I love. Tell me a little bit about that and why you chose this model to push ahead.
Go ahead, Laura. You can talk about the model and I'll say why we chose it. How about that?
I'm going to take a broad stroke at this, Avetis, because I wasn't here in place when this foundation had the great success of DTX and Novartis. But the case study is what it is, and it really informs the rest of our strategies. And many other foundations are taking a hard look at the way this worked. But I've been in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years and always, supporting foundations that work in medical research. So this is venture philanthropy is becoming more broad stroke. But the beautiful thing here in this story, and the way Susan tells it is so perfect, but really you took a company that had the right technology and married it with a foundation that really believed it would work for this disease. There wasn't anybody involved in the creation of that platform that even thought of CMT as an indication. And this is where the nonprofit sector, especially in the medical research side, is really, really powerful because we're the influencers in the space. Susan went to that meeting at Bio to speed date. She had 46 meetings this last year trying to find that matchmaking, because that's our role in this entire equation, is having resources ready, gathering all the KOLs and experts so that we can make quick, informed decisions, and influencing companies, whether it's they're already working on CMT and we're telling them, if you take it down this path, you could be much more successful, or finding companies that, I mean, even the CEO, who's a very, very avid supporter of us and a member of our board and research advisory committee now, but at the time, never heard of Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, which most Americans haven't, right? And so I think it's the power of being in the unbiased nonprofit sector. I mean, we are biased, right? But we're not in those meetings to line our own pockets with revenue. We're in those meetings to drive results. And so we have a different position at the table. And that translates to our venture philanthropy model, which I will speak to, Susan, that really our effort as a foundation is to go out of business. So we aren't creating a structure, which many nonprofits have, and there's absolutely no issue with this, but ours is just different. We don't want $3 million a year for 40 years. We don't want to have a broad mission. This foundation was designed and launched with a singular focus, which was to advance treatments for Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, which are none. I mean, the disease was named in 1886 and there's not a single treatment. And it's just time. And so we have a very, very narrow focused mission where we were really only going to raise resources and deploy them to the right projects. And in that equation, we have to have a different seat at the table. We have to position ourselves as a foundation to be flexible, to be open to all of the right projects, but also to have a seat at the table with the decision makers to say, we're not going to give you a grant, let's say a traditional grant, I'll say $1 million over 5 years, and it's just committed. And then the foundation pays that out, and you find out at the end if a paper is produced or if the project moved along. Venture philanthropy gives us a position where we can create scientific milestones up front. And if that company doesn't get the results it intended early on, we're going to know that maybe a year into a 3-year commitment, and we can pivot, move those resources to something that we really believe will move the needle forward. That happens a lot in science, especially in drug development. That's anticipated, that we're going to set down a course and everything looks good and everybody's excited. And then you look at the data and wow, that did not work the way we thought it was going to work. This model is built in anticipation of that, not in, any sort of criticism of that, but to be able to say, okay, that's not working. We're going to take that extra 600,000, 800,000, and we're going to move it over here because we're trying to close our doors. We're trying to get a cure on the market, and we are trying to go out of business. Brilliant. And so it's a different level of urgency, the way we bring this model forward to our relationships, and a different seat at the table. And our success in that is really predicated and built on the strength of our KOLs, our really strong research advisors that volunteer their time to make sure that we're collecting all of the known information worldwide around this disease, all of the platforms that are potentially out there. They're scouting, they're looking, they're advising, they're helping us score grants. And we really have had some incredible success, and thanks to that. Thanks in part to them.
The model almost, excuse me, Susan, the model almost reminds me of a venture studio or an accelerator model, right? Where you have the problem and you're saying, okay, which one of you brilliant people can solve it, right? And they basically have their formula to become $1 billion business if they solve it. You've given them the problem versus the other way around.
That's it. And the other component of this venture philanthropy model that Laura is talking about, the milestones, are one of the most important. The other one is that we're investors in the company, or we're investors in the program. So if the program moves forward, gets licensed, gets acquired, advances with some sort of financial benefit, the foundation gets a financial benefit. And it's modest compared to what the company gets. But the reason why we do that is because, 3 million people have CMT. Not everybody can invest heavily in the drug development process. And we're so grateful for those families that have invested so much so already. But we can't keep going to those same families and saying, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money. If we're winning with companies like DTX and Augustine, the Research Foundation should be winning as well. And so, because we're making these initial investments, and it's not an unreasonable ask. And by the way, not really all that unusual of a model. We're not the pioneers of this model. Other nonprofits have come before us, but it's working for us. So we're beginning to see fruits of our labors. We're beginning to see reinvestment from these companies into the research foundation. And we turn around and take that money and invest it in more drug development. Because I'm a patient, Laura's a patient, we want to put an end to this disease. I've got 6 generations of this disease in my family. Laura, you're at 3 that you can count, is that right?
That I know of. That's right. My family really didn't have a name for it until my generation. So we
Yeah,
don't know
so
how
I
far
mean,
back
we're
it goes.
personally affected. We want this disease to end, and we're not in this to become the next millionaire or billionaire. We're in this because we want to be able to go out and climb mountains. We want to shut the foundation down, help all those kids who are suffering today, have them not experience the same kind of symptoms that I've experienced, that Laura's experienced, and to close our doors and go off and do our next great thing. So that money that we get from our
huge.
Contracts all gets reinvested in new research.
Really cool, really cool. And I have an email back from Newbar as we speak, so that's kind of cool. We'll read it later and see if there's some traction there, but very
So
cool.
tell him also
What-
that Chris Austin from the NIH, who was at Flagship Pioneering for a little while, he was instrumental in helping getting the foundation started. He was a friend through the industry with a couple of us, and when we were launching this, we met him at Bio and said, help, and he said, whatever you need. And so he helped provide a lot of strategy when he was at NCATS at the NIH. And then he went off to Flagship, and now I think he's at Merck. Anyway, he's been instrumental, so you'll have to let Newbar know that one of his colleagues knows us well.
We'll send the email, the recording to him. Laura, thank you for that, by the way, Susan. Very, very descriptive, and I understand it more and more. Laura, what role did strategy, partnership, and storytelling play in translating that science into kind of an organizational momentum and movement for you all?
I mean, storytelling is the bread and butter of nonprofit sector. You have to finally articulate why your mission matters and why it should matter to everybody. With a rare disease, which CMT is, we have an extra challenge to try to articulate what this disease is like to people who have no idea what it is. And then beyond that, there are over 139 known different variations of CMT and a ton that we really don't even have a name for yet. And so the spectrum of how this disease presents itself is very different. Susan, to me, is a very different experience. It's got the same name, but it's not the same day-to-day experience. So we spend a lot of our time, I would say at least 50% of our time, talking about how we're going to talk about this, how we're going to articulate the urgency to individuals who don't have this in their family line. They don't understand that there's a 50% chance for almost all CMTs, except for one that carries only on the male line, that it will carry over, and what that burden feels like as a young adult who's family planning, to know that that's coming. We have to be able to articulate that burden, the burden of aging faster than your peers. It's sometimes invisible to the outside, but not to the person who's in it. And so I think explaining CMT is an everyday challenge for me, even the people that spend time with me in person, because they don't see what I feel. And that's just I'm a type 2 for anyone listening that is a CMT patient. So my disease is a little bit different. And so it's just a little bit harder to see versus someone who might have something that's a demyelinating, which you might be able to see that a little bit earlier. And so in the nonprofit sector, it's a big deal to figure out how to articulate your mission. You have to talk to a wide berth of KOLs too, right? You got to talk to your donors. You got to talk to potential donors. Again, those are the folks that maybe don't know what CMT is. You have to talk to clinicians and researchers, and then biotechs, pharmaceutical companies, the FDA, everybody in the space, from disease inception and knowledge all the way through to drug development and a cure. There's a ton of people that have to engage there, and what they care about is very different from group to group. And so our message is always the same. We want to cure this disease, but what we choose to share in terms of how we're focusing just depends on who we're talking to. And so that's all incredibly important. Now, strategy is where really our volunteers come in. I mean, I play a critical role in that, but our board of directors is an incredible group of patients, family members of patients, friends of patients. Everybody at the table today knows what the burden of this disease is and said, I'm going to bring my expertise, my time, I'm going to bring my courage, because oftentimes we're asking them to do things like fundraising that everyone wants to avoid. But come and help support us and help us build our strategy. We go to our researchers and say, what do you need to solve this? You're in this every day. What can we do to make your life easier? And one example about that, Avetis, is our Velocity campaign. You're going to hear us talking about that quite a bit, but that's born out of our researchers saying, we need $20 million. That was an estimation. Of course, drug development costs a lot more than that, but that's what, if you could provide that in an unrestricted way, meaning don't fundraise, know what you think you know we might need. There's so much knowledge happening day to day in this disease that we need to be ready for what comes in that moment to be able to say yes to it. So when donors are giving in a restricted capacity, they're pre-deciding where that money will go. Sometimes there's a project sitting there, it goes right out to the project. Sometimes, just depending on your foundation and your nonprofit, there isn't. You're saying, if a project comes in this way, then you can use my money for it. What we've decided is to support our researchers in this way, that's saying, we want to have resources available to you so that as the knowledge grows in this very rapid succession right now for CMT, you can be ready to say yes to a project you might not have even been thinking of 3 years ago. And that's a perfect example of where we're going and explaining that to our donor base. We are taking that from our researchers, and then we're deploying, how are we going to raise this much money in a 3-year period of time?
But
very
I think
minimal
you
resources.
did last time, right? You hit your 10 million. This time you have someone matching like 5 million or so, right? If first 5.
We have a $5 million lead gift for this $20 million campaign.
Incredible.
Yes.
That's so cool.
Yes.
Susan, I think you kind of talked about this, but are these bios, or whatever you want to call them, are they actually interested in solving CMT, because it's such a small, tiny population that has it, sounds like, at least that y'all are aware of? Can they apply this to other diseases, and that's why they're interested? Because I'm having a tough time believing that this alone could be $1 billion SAM, or SAM, whatever you consider it. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of things that are motivating the scientists and the biotechs. Biotechs usually are born out of academic institutions or a group of academic investigators who have a great idea, and they want to have the freedom to operate outside of their academic institution. So they might have a platform that they think preserves motor neurons. And the motor neurons are the nerves in your body that allows your muscles to move. It allows your eyes to blink. It allows your finger to do this. It allows your head to nod. Those are all motor neurons. And motor neurons are affected in Parkinson's. They're affected in ALS. They're affected in spinal muscular atrophy. They're affected in definitely Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. So they might have an application that they think is relevant to motor neuron diseases. But what they have to do is they have to find the best disease to demonstrate that their drug works. And sometimes that will be CMT. Sometimes they won't even know that CMT exists. They'll be so focused on ALS because they see what the marketplace is doing in ALS, and they see what their drug can do. And they're so focused on ALS, and in comes the Research Foundation at one of these speed dating meetings, or because we've done our homework and we just cold call them, which we do, that we're finding them. And we're introducing the disease to them, giving them the mechanisms of the disease. That's how it works in the body. We're telling them about the genes of the disease, which is what causes the motor neuron loss. And maybe there's a fit that their motor neuron drug, we'll call it motor neuron deterioration prevention drug, could actually work on one of the mechanisms that is activated in CMT. Maybe not activated in ALS, maybe not activated in Parkinson's, but they're looking at those diseases because that's what they know. and we can come in and introduce them to the disease. There are some companies, and especially since the Novartis billion-dollar acquisition of DTX, there are many companies now who are knocking on our door and saying, how do we become the next DTX? I've got a drug, and I would love to be acquired, and I think it could really work. I think it could be superior. How do I become next? And how do I get you to invest in my drug the way you did with DTX? So prior to the DTX acquisition, we were doing most of the door knocking. Now I would say the tables have shifted a little bit. We're still doing a lot of door knocking, and our doors are not being knocked on quite a bit. So it's exciting, but whether a biotech knows about CMT or not is a little irrelevant. If we know about their technology, we can introduce them to the disease. If they don't have the scientific expertise in peripheral motor neuron disease, those are everything in your periphery, your fingers, your toes, and moving upward, but they're focused on central motor neuron disease, which might be your spinal cord and brain, we can give them the scientific experts. We can show them the papers. We can tell them the best animal models and cell models. We can introduce them to the people who are designing the drugs, and they can ask all their questions. So the burden doesn't become on the biotech to find CMT and to know CMT. That's our job. That's our job. Their job is to know their platform, their motif, and to apply it to our disease.
That's really good. And a smart friend of mine once said, there's riches in the niches. So this seems to be very niche, right? And what a great opportunity to dominate it and do really, really well versus preying across 10 different large problem groups that everybody's trying to tackle.
And one of the benefits of getting into CMT, as Laura pointed out earlier, is it's a rare disease. And so the FDA has incentives for accelerating the drug development process for rare diseases versus common diseases. So if one is thinking about Parkinson's and they think it might have relevance to CMT, they might have faster and easier FDA conversations with a disease like CMT. If one is thinking about investing in Parkinson's versus CMT, they might want to look at the space. And is it crowded with drugs, or does it have 0 approved drugs like CMT? And where's the opportunity for them to be a blockbuster? I'm not trying to tell anyone don't go into Parkinson's. That's not my job. But my job is to say, hey, look, we're out here too. And there's a real opportunity for you.
I wonder, maybe you all can research this, but there's a promising startup I invested in called De Novo Sciences. Okay. I'm wondering if there's any opportunities there for both sides. I think they just raised a round, an official seed round. So again, I don't know the relevance, but I think you all will know pretty quickly.
Yeah, de novo is a term that we use in the world of genetics, where if there isn't a family history and then somebody just shows up with a case of CMT, and their genes just mutated upon conception, and that caused CMT. And that happens actually quite a bit in CMT1A. In the gene that's affected in 1A, it's actually weak. And so it's a spot for the duplication of the genetics to happen randomly in people who don't have a family history of it. And, we can trace back 1A in my family 6 generations. Another family, the first person is, 10 years old right now, or 2 years old, and their genes spontaneously mutated. So that's what de novo means, is it's a brand new mutation. And so de novo sciences, it, without looking at it, implies maybe it's focused on genetic medicines. I'm not sure.
Makes sense. Let's look into it. As two leaders with complementary roles, hopefully, how do you divide the focus between the mission, which Susan is the mission officer, right? Science and scaling the impact. Like, how do you all divide and conquer, or not divide? I don't know. How do you all do it?
Susan and I work very closely together. We're a really small team. Our foundation supports research all over the world. We have advisors from all over the world. There's only 7 full-time staff that work at the foundation, and the board is 11, and the two of us take up 2 of those seats. So it's a really, really small, intimate group. So everything happens lockstep. For me, which I'll speak to Susan, and then you can speak from your perspective, but Susan is the mission and the heart. I mean, she is the visionary of the foundation. And so I will rarely make a decision other than show up to that meeting on time without talking to her. And we have a very open dialogue that way of staying true to the original intent, staying focused on where we're going. Susan does a fabulous job for me being new into this organization to give me the history of, where something originated, where we came from, the history of a relationship. And then it's up to me to take that and say, where are we going to go next with it? So oftentimes, that's how we're working in our day-to-day. Our workload divides, and I oversee the board and the staff, and we have folks that help oversee the research. So everyone has their own space. And as a leadership team, we meet regularly, much like any other foundation. Susan is constantly looking at what roadblocks this foundation needs to tackle next. So talking with the FDA, talking with key stakeholders, building our convention, which is coming up at the end of September, and figuring out what is the right topics that we need to be talking about today. She has her pulse on the community of patients, clinicians, and researchers to understand this is the essence of where we are. And then she'll bring that to us, and I'm part of the team that helps to build her reality, build her vision.
Yeah, and Laura comes to us with 20 years of nonprofit leadership experience. And so I'm the girl who had the gumption to say, we need to do something because I don't want to be 80 years old and in a wheelchair, or 60 years old and in a wheelchair, which is a potential reality for me. And then Laura just very luckily found the job landed on her desk when she was at her other job. But she's a nonprofit leader, 20 years. And so she brings the strategy, the organization, the fundraising acumen, the knowing how to activate who and when. She's brilliant at that. And then I'm the girl who kind of keeps us focused on what we need to focus. So if an idea comes up that's off mission, we talk about that and kill it usually. That's my job, is to kill a lot of good ideas that just aren't good for the Research Foundation. That's been one of our strengths, is that we have one mission, and that's to develop drugs that will end this disease. There are great groups out there that are providing patient support and that are providing education and support groups, and all of that is critical, and we're very supportive of that, but that's not what we do. What we do is we take these good ideas that are kind of bouncing around, and we put some money and put some expertise to it, and hopefully get it into treatments into people.
Amazing. Every visionary need an executor, an integrator, as we call it in the EOS world. I mean, what a great, and your entire team is amazing. I mean, Anna, who is just, I don't know how she's so passionate about what you all do. I mean, that's how I met you guys. So really, really, really great team. Everybody that I've met has been top notch. So I could see why you all are doing so much with so little, right? It's not the size of the team; it's the caliber of teammates. Susan, you said something that's interesting, and I'll bring it back to more of a business concept. You said, as a visionary, your job is to shut down most ideas, which is really interesting because in my company, in my world, I have so many ideas, right? As most entrepreneurs do, it's my team actually does the opposite. They're like, hey, is this the right timing? Can we really do this? And they bring me down to earth sometimes, and I listen. It's interesting that you kill all these ideas. How does that work? I don't know who should answer that one, but
I think how that works for me is because of our laser focus on drug development. There are a lot of really good things that we could be doing. There are a lot of needs and gaps in the patient services community. There are a lot of really great things that we could be doing from even a drug development. So, if you think about the life cycle of a drug, it starts with an idea that comes out of an academic institution. And then if there's something decent there, and if all the stars align, it might end up in a biotech. And then the biotech does all the risk management of it. They, do all the preclinical work, which is making sure that it's safe and that it's effective. And then hopefully they get acquired by a big biotech or big pharma that takes them into clinical trials. And then we go through the trial process and hopefully an approval by the FDA if it's safe and effective. Those are the things we're looking for. So we could be funding all those questions that are like, I wonder how that works. And asking those questions has led us to where we are today. But right now, people have been working on CMT research as a disease for 50 years. It was first named in 1886 by three doctors, Charcot, Marie, and Tooth. Unfortunately, Dr. Tooth was not a dentist. He ended up as a neurologist and screwed the whole name up for us. But so those guys found it in 1886. We knew it was genetic because we could see it running through families, but we could also see so many people's symptoms acting so differently. And so the first gene wasn't found until 1991. And here we are in 2025, and we found 139 genes, but we still have many, many, many people who don't have a genetic diagnosis because their gene isn't understood to cause CMT. We just don't have enough people who've said, hey, I've got these symptoms and I've got this genetic profile for us to make a match. And so that's an example. We could be funding genetic discovery. And there's an argument for whether we should, because there are thousands of people out there with the symptoms of CMT, but not a genetic diagnosis. But we also have
So you're staying focused.
We also have 139 genes to work
like.
from. You know, that's like a good example. So, like, should we do this? What are the benefits? What are the risks? And I'll be honest with you, one of the genes that was just recently found, there was a drug that could target it, and it's through clinical trials right now. It's in the phase 3. So we could have had our hand in that. We didn't because we felt like we had enough genes to work with. So there's a good argument for looking at genetic discovery. Those are the kinds of questions that we're asking. How do we stay focused? How do we take the opportunities that are in front of us? How do we use the 40, 50, 60 years of knowledge that has already been funded, largely in part by the NIH? And how can we accelerate that from a drug that, or an idea that might be on a shelf, and get it into animals and then into people? And we have many examples. I could go on about the examples that we have of, you know, hey, have you thought about this? Yes, and here's my idea. It didn't get funded by the NIH 5 years ago, 7 years ago, a decade ago. And it's like, well, let us review it. And by the way, I'm not the one reviewing it. I'm not a scientist. Our scientific team is reviewing it, and they're the ones who are making the decisions. This is a great idea. It's worth funding. It's worth taking the risk.
Got it. Very good. So it's staying focused on the very narrow mission.
Very narrow. As in most foundations, you'll see their mission statement includes education or awareness, and ours does not. It's not that part isn't important. We have an annual convention, and we're here talking on your podcast, but we really spend all of our focus on raising critical dollars and deploying them to the right research projects that are going to get a cure to the market, going to get a treatment to the market. And that's our role. And there are other foundations that are contributing to other pieces that are helping with the patient journey today, and we applaud that. But this is our piece. And so when you're looking at scaling and growing a company, right, especially a startup, which is what we are, we're 7 years old, it's easy to think, oh, if we add on like a diagnostic testing plan, we're going to meet a ton of people, right? And then that's scalable, and we'll raise more money. We'll get more $100 donors, and they'll be able to add in and contribute. And that's where it's like, wait a minute. We're going out of business. We have to continue to stay focused. We have to basically stay as an early startup in that high raise mode, high deploy mode, proving this concept until we go out of business. We're not setting ourselves up for the long haul. Now, drug development takes a long time. So, you know, it's a little bit of a race between the two of, well, how long can you sustain this, this early model? But really, that's where we have, it often comes up from all sides. Susan's, as one of the founders, is saying, guys, we started with this singular focus, and it makes day to day more challenging, but it makes the mission much clearer. And everyone who signs up to support us, and everybody who gets involved, and every donor that writes a check knows we're going to stay true to what we started, which is just funding treatments, and we're going to stay true to that until it happens.
I like to
so those treatments get to patients.
I like to compare us to like the
coffee
coffee business. Like, are we Starbucks who's making a good cup of coffee, or are we Dunkin' Donuts who's making a good donut? Because you can't be both. Although maybe you guys like Dunkin' Donuts coffee better. I don't know. Laura lived in Boston for a while. Maybe she does. But the pastries at Starbucks, no, not to diss you guys, but they're not amazing. You know, you don't go to Starbucks for their breakfast. You just happen to get it because it's there. We want to be the best coffee maker. We're not going to add pastries or sandwiches. We want to be the best coffee maker. Come to us for a cup of coffee. Come to us for a treatment and a cure for CMT. If you need patient services, there are other places to go.
Huge. Where do you see the next billion-dollar opportunity coming from in CMT research?
It's hard to say. Well, obviously, I have no company to name for you. Where I see it coming from is the same place it came from the first time. Scientific advisors at CMTRF will tell one of us, whether it's Susan or one of our research team members, exactly what we need, exactly what to look for. And then we will go out and we will find it and we will deploy resources to get it off the ground, and it'll prove itself out. And that's the difference. It's starting the conversation versus waiting for it to come to you. So where it's going to originate is the exact same spot DTX did, which is scientific advisor deploying CMTRF to say, go and solve this problem. And then we'll have the resources available to do that.
Love it. Love it. If each one of you could give a piece of advice, personal advice or business advice to leaders today, what would it be?
Join a nonprofit. Your passion doesn't have to be CMT, but by the way, if it is, we're here and you can email me anytime. But everybody has something, whether it's a disease, something happening more globally, or right in your own community, homelessness, food insecurity, whatever it is. Your talent and contribution, if you're a marketing executive, if you're a project manager, if you do sales, it is a real, true value add to a nonprofit to join a committee, join a board, donate, fundraise, whatever your individual comfort level is. But nonprofits work pretty much like a startup all the time. It's very minimal paid resources because every dollar spent on a resource is $1 less to the mission. And so when executives from the for-profit sector say, yeah, I want to help, how can I help? It is an absolute game-changing gift to a nonprofit. So it's both parts wonderful. Every volunteer I've worked with over a 20-year course had a wonderful experience being able to bring their talent to the room and saying, hey, as a marketing executive, even though I don't do work in your space, I can tell you if you tweak this project just a little bit, you're going to get tremendous results. Or here's a tool that you can use that's going to help you minimize the amount of manual effort that goes into this project. And I might be able to get you access through my role, right? Those types of contributions and gifts might seem small to you, but they're enormous to a mission. So find your passion, find what matters, and contribute.
That's huge. I mean, and I agree with that concept. Although writing checks might feel good, and I think it's very much needed. For me, it feels a lot better when you can contribute. And Susan, I'm one of those people you mentioned. It's very difficult for me to ask for money, right? I rather give money than ask for money. But giving your brains up and your network or whatever is something that people can give. They don't have to give checks or help fundraise. There's other ways they can contribute. So I like that.
And I would add to Laura's, my advice would be know your focus and stick to it. So if you're a massive philanthropist, pick the couple or one cause where you can make the biggest impact. If you have an acute period of time where you can volunteer, stick to your focus. Find what lights your heart up and focus on that in your free time if you're a volunteer. And then it's kind of the same with the business, that our focus has been our strength. So know what you do and do it really, really well. And for me, it's like just when you go to Starbucks and you have an egg sandwich, you decide you never want an egg sandwich from Starbucks again, right? Don't make egg sandwiches if you're a great coffee maker. But it's that's for your time, that's for your talent, right. That's for your treasure, and that's for your business. I think that would be my perspective, because we can't be everything to everybody, and God knows we all try. So focus on what you really care about and put all your energy behind that.
That's really good. Really good advice. What's your favorite books, each of you?
My favorite book. Laura, you have one?
It could be a business book. It could be anything.
Listen, I'm going to shamelessly plug our chairman's book, Taking Stock. Peter De Silva. You can get it on Amazon. But what I love about it, and this is all a shameless plug for all around, but it was the first book that I read that talked about a personal experience with CMT. And it's a very brave thing. It's taking stock of his life, of his journey. That's part of his industry also. But it's a wonderful, vulnerable book that I'm very proud to have read and to know the author very well. I think talking about a disease that you might otherwise be able to hide is a very brave thing, whether it be, lupus, an immune disease, or something else. It's really tough to come out to the market. And I'm very proud of that.
Peter's
so
great.
I'm going to shamelessly plug Taking Stock.
I'm going to check out the book. He's great.
Taking Stock.
Susan?
Well, she gave me a minute to think about it. And actually, the first thing that comes to mind is A Man Called Uwe, which is that book. It came out maybe a decade ago and was made into a movie where Tom Hanks played the guy. He did the American version. And it's this guy who basically had no hope, and he was suicidal. And every day he tried to commit suicide, and he ended up meeting his neighbors across the street who gave him purpose and gave him back joy in his life. And so he was able to take what was a very desperate situation and turn it into purpose, and that parlayed into joy. And by the end of the book, he wasn't suicidal because his life was full again. And so I love that story because it's a little persistence from the neighbor. I think she probably suspected what was going on. And so it's persistence and tenacity and hope and making lemonade out of lemons. So I love that book, but I'm a voracious reader. So, I don't know if I could pick one. That's the one that's at the top of mind now.
That's a great one. Where can people find the cause, find you all, and contribute, get involved, or who knows, maybe they got the next drug discovery startup, billion-dollar startup?
Yeah, so CMTRF.org, again, CMT Research Foundation. You can check us out there. We do not have a brick and mortar office. That's part of, decisions on where to put resources. So we work fully virtual, but our website is our storefront. You can see everything that we're focusing on. And if you're listening to this saying, I think I might have CMT, I'm not sure, we have a list of what those symptoms might look like. If you're like, if you know and you haven't been following us, please do so. There are a lot of clinical trials that are starting this year, and there's many to come. And knowing that you do have it and having a confirmed genetic diagnosis is really important to see, can I participate in this trial or follow that particular drug development to see if it'll be available for me if and when it commercializes. So we list out every project we've ever funded, what type that might benefit, and the progress reports very transparently on our website. So if you're in this community, it's an absolute stop. You can sign up for a newsletter too, which means we're going to push a quarterly update to you saying this is the latest, most critical information you need to know about drug development.
I also want to add, if you're not in this community, if you don't have CMT, or if you don't think you do, and you're like, well, this was very interesting, but it's not my cause. Okay, it's not your cause. Let me tell you, CMT affects 3 million people around the world, many of whom are children. And there are many cases of CMT where the children end up in wheelchairs before they're 20 years old. And we believe that this disease is tractable, which means we can stop the progression, maybe even reverse the progression. The other key component is that we believe, as did Novartis, that CMT can be a gateway indication into helping to cure all motor neuron diseases or all neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's, MS potentially, and a lot of the muscular dystrophies that you hear about. So, it's a great way to make a personal investment in a disease that can be the gateway to curing many or all neurodegenerative diseases, while in the meantime creating a higher quality of life for children and adults who live with it. So if you're looking for a place to put your money and you want to have a high impact, may I say we're a great place to do that?
Indeed you are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan and Laura. You guys have been great. I've learned so much, and I'm proud to be a part of your awesome organization.
Thanks, Avetis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Avetis.
And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avetis Antaplyan, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.